This interview includes discussion around topics of sexual assault, domestic violence, physical violence, and harassment. This content may be difficult for some viewers, and we encourage you to care for your safety and well-being.
Okay. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you again about all of this stuff. I think the knowledge and wisdom that you have is not only necessary because it's not a conversation many people have, but going to be very enlightening for a lot of people, especially those who may have or know someone experiencing domestic violence but don't recognize it, like many of the women that you spoke of last time. So we'll backtrack real quick. Okay. Tell me your name, where you work, a little bit about your background, and how you got to the place you are now in human services.
All right, great. Well, my name is Taffy Hunter, and first, my job, my title is about 17 feet long. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for Spokane Regional Domestic Violence Coalition.
I love that.
Right, it's so long. And in English, that means that I get to talk about and teach people, educate about the dynamics of domestic abuse and abusive relationships, which is what I'm really passionate about. So, and then moving a step further than that, I work really hard to get upstream on issues of domestic violence, making systemic change within government, within society, within belief systems, so that we can not only understand the dynamics of it, but also bring it to an end, make it stop. Like, can we just all live safe? And so that's really what I'm passionate about. The reason I'm passionate about it is because I am a survivor. I was in a 15-year marriage that I had no clue was abusive until 10 years in, when I was watching a TV program, and I can't find that TV program. I don't even know what it is. I think it was on PBS or something like that, but a TV program about verbal abuse, and was just gobsmacked, had my mouth hanging open, and literally, just was completely in shock as I internalized and digested the fact that what I had been living in for the last 10 years wasn't my fault, and that I wasn't to blame, that I couldn't change it, and that I was an abused wife. Those three things, even now, make me emotional to think about. That's a lot to take in, that aha moment for me. Being the kind of person I am, kind of a little bit type A, a little bit of the now I know, so I want to know more kind of person, I went after it, right? I wanted to understand, what is this thing called abuse? What is this thing called domestic violence? What is this thing that I'm experiencing? Why am I experiencing it? How did I get here? And so that led me on a journey of discovery, of self-reflection, of education, and of course, finding safety as well. So in 2010, I fled a state that we were living in at the time with my 3 young children under the age of 7, came to the West Coast and found safety, really started to dig in more to that information, finished my degree in human services at Walden University, and found my dream job at the Spokane Regional Domestic Violence Coalition. And here I am. I get to talk about domestic violence all day long, helping other people, through advocacy and prevention work, helping other victims either come to the realization of what they're living in. We all have that aha moment, and or grow in their understanding of the dynamics that they are living in or have lived in. Safety planning, helping victims escape or get out or find safety, even find safety if they choose to stay in their relationship, which is a valid choice. So that's where we're at. That's where I'm at.
Thank you so much for sharing all that, especially your, the personal story that brought you into this work. And before I dive into every aspect of what you just said, would you feel comfortable elaborating on, you used a very strong word when you're talking about, getting out of your situation. You said fled. And I feel there's leaving, there's maybe like the the thought in general society, like, just leave, but you fled.
Yeah,
And
I did. Yeah, that's a strong word, and I use it on purpose because victims of domestic violence who are living in abusive relationships are being terrorized. You're living in terror. And it's rarely a situation, I would go as far as to say probably never a situation that is easy just to open the door and walk out for so many multitude of reasons. But just knowing that your physical safety, your emotional safety, your spiritual safety, your very life could be on the line when you leave an abusive relationship. That's when women are most at risk of being killed, being murdered, is as they're planning on leaving, while they're leaving, and up to 6 months after they're leaving. Those aren't definitive boundaries. Like, we know that there is times outside of those boundaries that are also unsafe, depending on a victim's story. But fleeing, I had a 3-day window that my spouse was out of town. And that first day that he was gone, I was just a mess. Is this what I want to do? Is this what I need to do? Is this the right thing to do? And then there was a phone call, and I confronted him about some of his behaviors, and his response was extremely inappropriate. And that was my line in the sand that he had stepped over. And so I knew at that very moment when I hung up the phone that we were on our way out. I had no way of leaving. He had left me with a minivan, 3 young children under the age of 7, homeschooling mom, no access to cash, checks, or the credit card. He had taken the credit card because I had purchased shoes for one of the kids without his permission. And I was driving on a spare tire, which, of course, he said he would get fixed when he got back, but that's a way to keep me roped into staying there, right? Didn't really know anybody, but I knew it was time to go, that we had crossed that line from we can live safely but unhappily to this is becoming very unsafe and I have to go. So I fled. I packed up the kids in the van and we drove away, and we drove 4 states, I think. We drove through 4 states to get to safety. And I think that's an extreme situation in my case. Every victim's story is different, but every victim does have to make those decisions on how best to find safety. And there's almost always financial abuse involved, which is one of the major barriers that prevents victim survivors from being able to find safety quickly or effectively. Women's shelters can be so helpful in that. Friends, family, if you have a support system, that can be really helpful in that. But yeah, victim survivors have to flee. It's not an easy just, this relationship is over now, because domestic violence is surrounding power and control, right? And when you say this relationship is over, you don't break up with somebody who has the power and control over you. You don't just, okay, honey, 50-50, take your couch and leave. That's it's not how it works. And so, yeah, fleeing is definitely an operative word when we're talking about toxic relationships and domestic violence.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that because in the spirit of storytelling and how compelling it can be, getting across a message, that's a very powerful word. I think opens up the mind to understanding just how serious these experiences and these abuses are. Are you sure you didn't marry my father?
It's so funny you say that. When I first got out, my counselor said to me that every victim survivor story is different. Everyone is different. Everyone has to have gone through a different journey and experienced different things through their journey. But every abuser's story is the same. They all read out of the same book, go to the same university, where, they all use the same tactics, and they're all the same. And so, yeah, we hear that all the time. Like, wait a minute, that was my abuser. Mine did that. Because they all, it's definitely a science. It's definitely a science that they've all plugged into.
I definitely just imagine that, like a Stepford Housewife situation, like the movie, but with the, never mind. Just a bunch of weirdos thinking that they got a club. But I want to make a point before we get any further, and just a small one, that not all abusers are men. And sometimes those that are survivors can also be men. So I just want to put that out there because I think it's important to me that we don't, let that go awry, especially as we go along. But the majority of people, of survivors, are women. And go ahead.
Yeah, it's just going to piggyback off of that. Statistics show us that victim survivors are mostly female, and statistics show us that most perpetrators are male. Vastly, those numbers are vastly huge. However, yes, men can and are definitely victims of domestic violence. Often victims of domestic violence in same-sex relationships, so the perpetrator is also male, and less often is the perpetrator female. However, when we have female perpetration, we see a lot of verbal and emotional terrorism, severe, awful terrorism from women. Sometimes we can see physical abuse, and so that can't be discounted either. And so, it's really an area that needs more study. We don't know a lot about the victimization of men and their experiences. And of course, we know domestic violence goes underreported, vastly underreported in women. We can just imagine how much that underreporting happens for male victims as well.
The lack of reporting, or I guess the lack of motivation to, or maybe even the awareness, is that sourced from just kind of this Western idea or bias of what domestic violence is? Is it not just fear in the situation? I understand that is part of it, but do you think we still collectively hold on to this idea that a woman might be judged or, not taken seriously because people don't really understand the complexity and severity of domestic abuse?
Absolutely. There is so much shame and guilt surrounding victimization of any kind. And there's so many myths surrounding domestic violence.
Yeah, let's talk about myths.
Right? So yeah, that's one of the reasons that it goes highly unreported. Domestic violence also goes highly unreported because it's not always illegal in our system. Most states, right? Your eyes just went big. Most states only recognize physical and sexual abuse as illegal, and stalking sometimes. But coercive control, verbal abuse, yelling, screaming, calling somebody names, dictating to them what they can and cannot wear, coercive control kinds of behaviors. Some forms of financial abuse are not illegal, right? There's a lot of abuse that isn't reportable. That what are you going to say? He didn't hit me. And a lot of us as victim survivors live in that world for a long time. He didn't hit me, so what do I do?
Mm-hmm. And what just came to my mind when you said that, that's nuts. All these things that are quite honestly, very obviously abusive actions. There's this, I don't want to use the word ironic, but it seems very, very, very off that Black women who are always like judged for being angry, or that's assumed that they have like an attitude. And yet we're going to shame them for an idea that is just a bias. And yet by the book, allow so much of what we claim they do just fine, unvisited. And I'm getting frustrated and we're only 5 minutes in.
Take a deep breath. Yes, lots of self-care on this conversation, guys. Everyone, just take a deep breath. And, I really should start now with that little bit of a trigger warning. These are hard conversations. These are really difficult stories to tell. And so I encourage our listeners today to look after yourself. If you need to press pause, do it. If you need to stop listening, do it. Reach out for help. If you feel like, this is a situation I need to talk to a counselor or maybe my local women's shelter, feel free to do what you need to do to take care of yourself, because these are really, really hard conversations. Very, very traumatic.
And that is a sign of a person who cares, very much so. The current, we talked about last time, the kind of like the current work that you're doing. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I think it'd be a good idea for people to understand, okay, so what is happening out there in the world to address and kind of help women in these situations?
Yeah, for sure. So, historically, domestic violence, again, has been that elephant in the room that we never talk about. And so, first and foremost, I advocate for survivors. And part of that is telling my own story, right? Being able to share what I've experienced. And I certainly have not experienced the worst of the worst, as some people have. But it's still, whenever we share the things that have happened to us that has been hard, it really opens the door for other people to share what they're experiencing as well, to think, oh my gosh, I am not alone. And that's the biggest thing about being a domestic violence victim survivor, is because you've been isolated. And whether it's the shame and the guilt feelings, or spiritual beliefs, or just the fact that your abuser has made you believe that nobody's going to believe you, hearing the words, I believe you, is pivotal in recovery. And so we start there. We start with advocacy, listening to stories, helping victim survivors find safety in whatever the situation they choose to be in, helping them understand dynamics of abuse so that they are able to recognize it when it happens. So I am a certified advocate in Washington State to start with. So I talk to lots of survivors, which is very fun, very fulfilling, and very terrifying and emotional all at the same time. And then SRDVC, Spokane Regional Domestic Violence Coalition, we have a ton of different programs, which I absolutely love. As the education and outreach coordinator, I get to train people in my community, be it law enforcement, security for colleges, tribal members, schools, young people, youth, from every walk of life. Domestic violence does not discriminate. It doesn't care if you're wealthy or educated or female or 22 or 82. If you're, what race, nationality, or religion you are, everybody can be impacted by domestic violence. And so our numbers tell us that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men are impacted by domestic violence in their lifetime. By that, we mean that either you witness it as a child, experience it through child abuse from a family member, which is a form of domestic violence, or as you grow older, you're in a dating relationship or married. Somebody knows somebody. 1 in 4, that's a big number, and 1 in 10 men. In Spokane, we're the worst in Washington State as far as those numbers are concerned. Our numbers are actually 1 in 3 women. And so, you can sit in church or go to a symphony or a movie and count every third woman and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that every third woman has been abused in some manner, which is staggering. That's a staggering thought. And so we work really hard to get into those schools, educate, talk to, support, and believe survivors. We have campaigns that we run called End the Violence, trying to help our community change their misperceptions about violence, to understand that we don't have to choose this way of living, that there's help. I've put together lots of resource flyers for different parts of the community. Our Indigenous folks, I think it's 3 different tribes in our area, 3 or 4 different tribes. And so we have Indigenous resources, we have youth resources, we have homeless youth resources, because domestic violence intersects with all of community and society's issues. If you're dealing with addiction, there's going to be domestic violence in there. If you're dealing with homelessness, it's the leading cause of domestic violence. Domestic violence is the leading cause of homelessness for women and children in the United States. If you are dealing with academic struggles, or kids getting kicked out of school, or gang violence, gang involvement, all of those things have intersections with domestic violence, which is why I went into human services, because we can intersect in all of those areas. And that's why it's so important for us to understand that. So our campaigns helping to educate the community through billboards and ads and PSAs and all of that. We're ready to launch our business toolkit, which is an online opportunity for business owners and other, anybody can access it. We have short 15-minute trainings so that you can recognize, respond, and refer when domestic violence comes knocking at your business door. Also, how do you prepare your business for violence with some kind of a domestic violence policy? Before it comes, how are we going to deal with it? What are the appropriate ways? Those numbers, remember, it's somebody in your workplace is going to be impacted by DV somehow. Same with schools. How are you guys going to deal with dating violence? I'm currently sitting in a hotel room in West Virginia. I'm here for a Handle with Care conference. Handle with Care is an amazing program that we take part in that notifies schools when one of their students has been involved in a traumatic incident. And so it doesn't give that school any of the information that has happened, but it allows the adults in a student's life to know that something traumatic happened. So when kiddo gets to school and they're falling asleep, maybe instead of detention, or teacher slamming a book down on the desk to wake that student up like they did when I was a student. Maybe we just let them take a nap somewhere safe, right? Make sure that kiddo has meals that they can eat that day. Maybe it's just as much as let's put off the test because you're not in a place today where you can do a good job on a test. And that kind of trauma it doesn't have to be domestic violence. It can be any kind of trauma that's experienced by a kiddo. Did somebody have a medical emergency and I was in the ER until midnight last night? That can be traumatic. Maybe a short-term trauma, maybe a long-term trauma, maybe an ongoing trauma. It's not for us to decide, but it's for us to support. And so Handle with Care is another program that we do to help end that generational cycle of trauma that can also lead to either perpetrating or becoming a victim or both of domestic violence.
Oh, those words you just said, it's not our job to decide, it's our job to help. I think I just messed that up entirely. But I feel like that applies across our field. And I've been saying that, like, human services has the best opportunity to cross paths. Like, we actually are running out of a choice, but I digress. I think I've gone on a tantrum about that in every episode. I want to go back to, you were talking about Handle with Care, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember last time we spoke that I had asked how often you get to work with other organizations to kind of evolve and plan and extend your outreach, and what that's like, at least in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I absolutely love about working with SRDVC is that we're a coalition. And so as a coalition, we're kind of like an umbrella, and we can pull in everyone who needs to sit at that table so that we can listen to their puzzle piece of the problem. And instead of reinventing the wheel in many situations, we can work together and get that wheel moving faster, more efficiently, reaching more people, getting more funding. And so, on a daily basis, we're working with law enforcement, direct care agencies. We're working with mental health. We're working with sexual assault services, hospitals, funders, individuals. Right now, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And so we've partnered with over 100 businesses in our community, and it's super exciting. We call it Purple for a Purpose. And these businesses highlight a purple item during the month of October. So if it's a restaurant or a coffee shop or a bakery or bar, they can highlight an item on their menu that is purple. And we give them all the signage and everything. And so when somebody orders one of the P4P items, the Purple for a Purpose items, it brings awareness to the fact that it's DV Awareness Month or DV Action Month in some cases. It also opens up that opportunity to talk about it, right? And And then thirdly, it also directs them, because we have a website and all the rest of it, it directs them to places they can either donate or they can find resources and reach out for help if they believe that themselves or somebody else in their life could benefit from those resources. So partnerships among our community to end violence of all kinds is absolutely essential. We work with the school districts, we work with the regional health district, all of it. Everybody has a foot in this pool, and everyone needs to splash around together in order to make a difference, really. And so That's what we try to do as a coalition. It's one of my favorite things, is to sit at the table with everyone who has a voice, who has an idea, who has work in this, and to realize that, even if you're an ER nurse, if you don't know how to maybe screen for domestic violence, that's a place where we might be able to catch a lot of victims and help them, right? A teacher, do you know what to do if a child discloses to you? My first degree is in early childhood education, and I've had kindergartners disclose to me about their home situation. So what do you do? What do you do when they say, Daddy was screaming at Mommy this morning and Mommy was crying? If she would just listen to him, then he wouldn't hit her.
The impact, it's like tentacles. It spreads, and then it kind of just becomes not just complicated, but just harder and harder to get out of that thicket. Before I forget, I wanted to touch on something that you had mentioned before, and it blew my mind. The connection between DV and mass shootings.
Yeah, for sure.
What in the world? Because we didn't dive into it, so unpack it, because that's crazy. We need to know more about that.
Yeah, so the media doesn't pick up on this a whole lot, but studies have shown us, there's a lot of very valid scientific studies out there that have shown us that mass shootings, which are typically defined as 4 or more victims of a shooting, mass shootings over 54%-ish, that may have changed since last time I looked, are all related to domestic violence. And in fact, just about every school shooting we have had in this country has included domestic violence. And so when you look at the fact that, our most recent shooter in Uvalde went and I believe shot his grandmother, if I remember that story correctly, that's domestic violence, right? When girlfriends come up and say, I broke up with him and he was really violent, or I broke up with him because we had a history of stalking, that's domestic violence. That's interpersonal violence. That's dating violence, right? Most shooters don't make the news like those big, massive school shootings do. How often do we see in the news that some, and I'm going to stick with the typical male versus female stereotype that we already addressed. Dad takes a gun and shoots his wife and children. That's a mass shooting related to domestic violence. Somebody shows up at a movie theater and opens fire, and we find out that an ex-girlfriend was targeted. It's absolutely amazing. And it's to the point where advocates, we can hear the news and we're like, domestic violence. Yep. I can guarantee that has domestic violence attached to it somewhere. And almost always that is the case.
You just blew the majority of people's biases or misconceptions of just literally the term domestic violence away, at least me. Because people just see it, how we've been shown in the movies, and et cetera, et cetera. Even people have seen it in their own families, only have that one version to kind of work off of, right? And a moment of self-reflection. I'm just going to pause the tape and come right back.
Take that deep breath.
I'm just fascinated. It's not hard to change the mind about it, because there's knowledge and understanding that comes from it. But just like everything else that we deal with in this field, the complexity is not just, it doesn't stop at how hard it is to decide to get out of that situation. That's complex in itself, but that's like 2 steps down the sidewalk compared to how far this travels, right? And mass shooting, and I see it now. My goodness. And it's fascinating that you mentioned that a lot of shooters don't make the news. I mean, but when does the news ever pick anything up? And I'm throwing shade. Yes, I am. I didn't get to ask you this question before, and I'm curious, what are the populations that are most vulnerable to domestic violence?
That's a really good question. And again, I'll reiterate that domestic violence is across all populations, regardless of who you happen to be or what kind of lifestyle you happen to live. However, we do see certain populations that have more impact and higher numbers. Unfortunately, our African American women under the age of 45 are highly, highly, highly impacted. Like, they're not impacted by so many other things already. That's also a situation that that has to be dealt with in that population. Alaskan Natives and Indigenous peoples, numbers there are very, very, very high. College-aged young women, very, very high in those areas as well. Those are probably the three high off the top of my head, the three highest statistics. Definitely women just across the board with all kinds of violence. And then, of course, we know that if you are in a relationship that is abusive, that leading up to leaving, and then 6 months after leaving is your highest rate of lethality. So regardless of whether you fit into any of those other areas of age or race or, whatever, when it's time to leave, when you're making that plan to leave, it's super, super, super important you get in contact with an advocate at a women's shelter who can do some safety planning with you, because your lethality risk just went up tenfold. And that's when we find that women are being killed.
Just a side note, there's some more details on safety planning on the website, right? In the violencespokane.com or .org.
Yep, and the violencespokane.org. We are really quite local in our website. And so I would also recommend that you go to thehotline.org. That's our national domestic violence hotline. And any of the advocates on any women's shelter hotline can do safety planning with you. Safety planning is not as scary as it sounds. And it's also not an examination. Safety planning is literally a conversation with an advocate who understands the kind of situation you're living in, who can help you discover your strength areas and areas that are potentially dangerous. It might be something as simple as, one of the first things I always say when I'm doing a safety plan with a victim is that understand that there's certain places in your house that are safer to fight than others. Stay out of kitchens and bathrooms. Not only do kitchens and bathrooms have weapons, but they also have lots of hard surfaces that if you're pushed down or you fall, you are more likely to get a concussion or some sort of worse injury in those areas, right? Mm-hmm. We recommend that you stay in bedrooms and living rooms, lots of soft surfaces there. Also usually has access to an exit point. And so try not to get in. Another reason not to go to a bathroom, usually we can't fit through those tiny little windows. You've just put yourself in a boxed canyon, and it's much more difficult to get out. And so, just ideas like that, talking about really having in mind who is safe in your world, who can you call if you need help. If you need someone to hold a go out bag, if you have to flee very, very quickly and you need somewhere to go, is there a friend you can keep a duffel bag with who, and what are you going to put in that duffel bag kind of thing? Do you work at night? Do we need to make sure that you have somebody walking to your car with you? Like, everybody's situation is fluid and different. And a safety plan is a living, breathing plan. It's something that just keeps your safety at the top of your head so that you can just do those little extra things, right? Do you need a Ring doorbell? Is that something that would help keep your apartment safe? Does your deadbolt work? Sometimes very simple stuff that can really improve your risk and help keep you safer.
I'm just drawing a parallel that came to mind. Safety plans are also popular among people who are at high risk of mental breakdowns or are in poor mental stages. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this woman was just sharing her experience about her years of mixed diagnosis, and how she ended up creating a safety plan with her sister in case she just ever fell in a hole. And a lot of the details that you just gave were part of her conversation too. So again, those links between two different types of pains, but it's not uncommon for people to need options, right? Obviously, because like isolation and lack of options and powerlessness is the toolkit for abusers, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to add one more thing that a lot of people don't realize. You, as a victim survivor, do not have to go into shelter to access services. That's one of those myths that we had alluded to previously. You can call the shelter and get support services without having to access the actual shelter portion of shelter. Not everybody needs to live in shelter. Some people do. The shelter experience, it's hard. Nobody goes to shelter and is super duper happy about it, but it's also temporary. It's a great way to get safe. It's a great way to find safety and support. And so if you have that opportunity and you need to take advantage of that opportunity, do it. But if you're not ready to go to shelter, but you do need safety planning, or you do need ideas on, how do I leave with a pet, or what do I do with my kids, or any of the numerous things, how do I get to work? Any of those things that can be boundaries to leaving, just call your shelter and they will help you. You don't have to access their shelter services in order to get counseling and legal aid and safety planning and advocacy work. All of those things are still available.
So I have two questions to ask. They're not related, but you say the infliction behind just call your shelter, right? And I just notice it because I'm fascinated by the brain's disconnection from our reaction and emotional state and our ability to understand what our actions should be. What compels women? I don't know if it's if there's like this universal thing, but what usually compels women to kind of cross that line in the sand? Is it PBS, or is it just different for everyone? Because there's knowing, right, that you need to go, and that you're in danger, but that emotional prison, and that happens in all sorts of experiences in life across the board, but specific to domestic abuse and violence. Like, is there a way that we can encourage that moment of aha, I guess?
I think that my answer to that goes back to one of those myths. And let me set that up a little bit. As victim survivors, as people who are inherently born with love in our hearts, right? We love our spouse. We don't want to have a broken family. We don't want to lose that dream of our future with the person who we decided to have a future with. Like, there's a lot of loss when you choose to walk away from a relationship. So first of all, recognizing that loss is in and of itself a barrier to leaving. You're going to have to grieve that relationship. Even if he beat you to a pulp, there's still that, abusers aren't bad. Their behavior isn't bad all the time. That's part of the trauma bond. That's part of the reason we stay, is because we did fall in love with this human, and they do kind things sometimes. They do loving things sometimes. And so when I first left, and here's the story part. When I first left, I was watching, I think it was NCIS or one of those programs. And the situation in the program was domestic violence. And the victim survivor on the program said these words, and it was just like, oh, to me, hope is paralyzing. Hope is paralyzing. And that's exactly how it feels as a victim, is you hope for so long that things will change. You hope that you can fix it. You hope that he loves you enough. You hope that you have a future together. And I think that no matter no matter the situation, at some point, a victim survivor has to come to a place where they recognize that there is no more hope in that relationship. And however that looks, whatever that picture is in their life, being able to come to that place, that line in the sand that says to them, I'm done. There's no more hope. This isn't on me. I can't fix this. I need to be safe. And I need to figure out how to be safe. I think that that's the answer to your question. That's when people choose to start taking steps towards safety. Victim survivors are so incredibly brave. They keep themselves safe every single day. The actions that they take, the way they live, the way they protect themselves and their children is just amazing. They are smart and intelligent and kind and loving, and they don't give up easily, which is, it's one of the strengths that we see. And so coming to that place to say, I'm going to move my hope out of my relationship with this person who's abusive toward me and put my hope toward a different future. At the same time, recognizing that there's going to be a grieving process to that, recognizing that that includes loss on some level. I'm going to choose to give up the hope on this relationship. That's when victims start to move forward in finding safety.
I've been quoting you all week on that one. Swear to it. In conversation with my partner. I love that so much. And not that I'm a cynic and not that I think you sound like a cynic, but there is, from personal experience that I've had, and not related to domestic violence or abuse, but in other poor decision-making experiences, that you call it hope, call it blissful ignorance. It's just at some point, you're going to hit a spot where you're like, I can dig this hole deeper, or I can redirect this energy in the other direction while acknowledging and no longer ignoring, like, that direction is hard, but this one's been harder. And I got action is the key. And this is where I also see how it is so difficult on deeper levels for individuals to just even explain to themselves, right, out of those emotional fears, to get out or make a change, right? And so I empathize with that, because sometimes you just dig and you think your way out is down. And from my personal viewing of, people around me, that saying, it often gets worse before it gets better. There's an inch of truth to that for sure. And as much as I wish you could have told me, like, this is how we inspire emotional and transformative change in women, just like that, I also understand and acknowledge, like, that's not how we work as human beings. Yeah. My other question was, you had mentioned, what was it? The NCIS?
Mm-hmm.
I have seen before on TV, right, and in documentary series, this tendency for women who in self-defense, especially in abusive relationships, are treated like criminals for that act of self-defense. And, it is quite a conundrum when, an abuser is killed by, someone that they have put in that position to defend themselves. But, like, why is that such a hard thing to believe, or I guess confront within the legal system and the justice system, that a survivor or a victim might pull the trigger if they feel like their life is threatened? Like, why is that even a thing?
It is definitely a thing. It's definitely something that we call them victim defendants. And it's a systemic problem. It's the way our systems, our court systems, our legal systems have been set up from the beginning, which was to protect white men, frankly. And And I think we're going through a really transformative change right now. Change is always slow. A woman who finds herself in that situation, let me back up a little bit to our previous question, because this is kind of related. Coming to that aha moment, giving up that hope that we were talking about, moving that hope to our future instead of keeping that hope with that relationship. That's a journey. So you'll have your aha moment. It still might be years before you're able to get out and be safe, depending on your situation. It's a journey. It's not a destination. And part of that journey could potentially include sexual and physical violence, including needing to defend yourself. And thankfully, there's a large movement within the advocacy world to educate and share knowledge with law enforcement and court personnel so that they can begin to recognize when a victim has been defending themselves, and understanding that the dynamic in a domestic violence is power and control, and what that power and control can look like, the tactics that are used to maintain that power control, can help us figure out who the actual victim and who the perpetrator in a situation is. And so, we're not there yet. We're not there yet, but we're getting there, I think, slowly. There's more understanding. There's getting to be more understanding. But yeah, we still have lots of victim defendants. As a legal advocate, I've had to go to bat many times for, a woman who's come in shackled and has 2 black eyes, right? And you read the police report, and as an advocate, I'm seeing what, the actual situation was, and that she should not be the one standing in front of us in an orange jumpsuit, right?
Yeah.
And so then, having that legal advocacy with you to talk with everybody involved in the court system, to be like, hey, I think this was read wrong. We need to look at this more closely. We need to, here's the power and control dynamic. That's really, really important to make a change. One of the things that our organization is doing is we are creating a domestic violence therapy court. So non-felony courts, or it's a non-felony court. So when somebody is going through the court process, right, this court will enable the accused person, the perpetrator, to be able to access perpetrator treatment, monitor that treatment to make sure that they're getting through the process of it, help potentially even pay for that treatment, which is a barrier to somebody who's perpetrating violence, right? If they are low income and they have to pay $40 or $80 a week to go to these classes, that's not going to help them very much. So that's one of the things that we're hoping we can see as a change to help people be able to change their belief systems so that they can change their behaviors, right? Abusers believe that they have a right to control. They have a right to power. They're entitled to this kind of behavior against another person. And the only way we're going to change that is by changing those belief systems and those senses of entitlement. And batterer intervention programs can be really effective for some people for that. So yeah, that's some of the things that we're doing to change legislature, talking to our state representatives, making sure that the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, it continues to be funded. And it seems like every year or two it comes up and, Congress doesn't want to fund VAWA. Well, that's where a lot of our safety programs, our prevention programs, our intervention programs are funded through. That's where a lot of the understanding comes from. That's where some of our research happens so that we can understand the dynamics of the situation better. And so all of those levels, we have to impact, we have to talk, we have to discuss it. We saw the changes that happened when it came to child abuse and neglect. And, the lobbying and the advocacy and the changes that we've seen happen with states and with laws and with federal laws, we can do the same thing. We can do the same thing for domestic violence. We can help bring every home to a place of safety if we hit all these different levels of change.
Yeah, I imagine the need is not a reactionary one, but a preventive one. And again, that circles right back around to that complexity when it comes to these, individuals involved. I had a very wonderful and moving conversation with another future guest who is an advocate for women that are survivors of sex trafficking. And we touched on people's ability to hold empathy for abusers or traffickers, because not all, but some come from broken homes, or they are broken long enough to then have these belief systems that you're talking about that are still, versions of self-brainwash, and toxic and often deadly. But it's similar to like the war on drugs. Like if you scare people into thinking that they are bad people, heart and soul, because they're doing bad things, then you're not going to get those bad things stopped, because you're not considering that they are human beings and that it just so happens to be unavoidable that some people do bad things because bad things were done to them. So, and that's my hope. I'm assuming that a lot of these perpetrator like required courses and workshops, is that like the, I guess, the encompassing or overall approach?
Yeah. So recognizing that the vast majority of batterers do have trauma histories, that's not an excuse.
No.
But it can be a player in why they choose the behaviors that they choose and
Right.
why they have the belief systems that they believe. And so recognizing that helps us then step in. And I'm not a batterer interventionist. That's not my role.
Sure.
I'm an advocate. So,
Yeah.
but I do know that being able to step in and help these individuals really recognize where there's a disconnect in their belief system, in their entitlement, in their behaviors, in connection to the fact that they want a family, that they want their children to be raised safely, that they love their spouse, right? What's that disconnect? What does that look like? How can we fix it? Kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I believe every human has a choice, and every human can choose to live better and be better. Every human can change. And so even batterers, sometimes we think that batterers and perpetrators are the worst of the worst, throw them away, lock them away. But they can change. Everyone can have that choice, can make that choice to do the hard work. I'm not saying it's easy, but we have to recognize that we are all human. We've all gone wrong somehow, some way. And but with that said,
mm-hmm.
we also know that most batterers do not choose to change, especially if they're not sent through an intervention program. And so with that said, it's not ever up to a victim to change their batterer. Can't happen, won't happen, don't do it. It's not up to you to change them. It's not up to you to fix it. It's not your fault that you're being abused. And since it's not your fault that it's happening and it's not up to you to change it, then my advice is let's do what we can do to get you safe and make sure that you have a future. And hopefully one that's very fulfilling and successful in your eyes.
100% agree. And I know that there's never a conversation that kind of delves into the complexities of these experiences that people have, either as survivors or as batterers or something in the middle, that it's not mentioned that this is not just there's no excuse. You don't just get a slap on the wrist and you change. Like, it is evident. Well, it's actually, I feel like, in my opinion, a human necessity for survival to make choices through your own willpower, and you cannot rely on anybody else to do that for you. And that's a huge, hard lesson, right? My mom's relationship with my dad, there was very much at that entry point, like, oh, I can fix him, right? And then he fed off that like an energy vampire, like, yeah, you can help me lead a better life. And even after she was out of that situation, it was still difficult for her to let that part go.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you acknowledging, that this is not, we're giving them, a pass because they've been hurt before. Like, no. But again, if you continue to poke a bear without considering like where it came from, that was a terrible analogy. I'm going to take that out of the video. It's just somebody. It doesn't have to be everybody, but somebody. These two things can occur. You can be scolded for your bad actions, and you can also have someone empathize with you for the reasons that you did them. I think just in human services alone, that has to be a crucial, not a dividing line, like you're on one side of the rope or the other, but this survival mentality, just hope in the other direction, that we can envision like survivors do, who they want to be and become that because it's within their willpower. And keep in mind that everybody is responsible and has the option to do that. Now I've gone on a spiritual rant.
It's all good, and I also tell survivors that it's okay to come to the place. And I came to this place personally. I love my ex-husband. I will always have a part of my heart that loves him dearly. I care about him as a person. I can't live with the man. He is not safe to live with.
Yeah.
I will not live with him. I cannot live with him. I can, barely communicate with him because he is so toxic. Right. But that doesn't mean that I have to, sometimes I think we expect survivors to either love or hate and despise. We don't have to do that. We're human. There's so much love in this world that we can hold for somebody, empathy and compassion for somebody's story without having to live with them, to reconcile with them, to put ourselves in a place where we're no longer safe. It's okay to look after ourselves, to be in a safe place, to live a successful and a happy and a safe life, and still hold that little piece of, you meant something to me once, especially if you have kids together, you're the other parent to my child, that matters. It's okay to hold that and not reconcile, not live together, only communicate through, email. It's okay. It's okay to have boundaries on a relationship and still care about somebody.
Yeah, you can hold a hot rock in the snow. And I don't think I don't know, but I don't think we've evolved as human beings to really hold two contradictory concepts like that in our head. But that's neither here nor there. We've talked about so much, but I want to ask you, is there anything that we haven't kind of visited that you think is crucial? It can be a PSA, or it can be something, canceling out a myth, or it can just be, advice for viewers watching.
I think I just want to go back for a minute to the basics of domestic violence, to the fact that it is the motivation of somebody who chooses battering behavior is power and control. And that when someone chooses power and control, it comes out in certain ways. So you're going to experience, and it's a continuum, which I've talked to you about before.
Yeah.
And, it starts with emotional and verbal abuse. It starts with very, what some might call minor emotional and verbal abuse, little tiny things that we can rationalize away. He was in a bad mood or was tired, or if I wouldn't have accidentally stepped on his toe, he wouldn't have sworn at me. Those sorts of things that we can rationalize. And that
does gaslighting fall in that area? This popular term, gaslighting?
Okay. Emotional abuse, mental abuse, for sure. Gaslighting is also known as crazy making you believe that what you saw you didn't see, what you experienced you didn't experience. Crazy stuff, right? Wow. And so domestic violence always starts there with that verbal and emotional abuse, moves into financial abuse. 99% of all abusive relationships include financial abuse. And that can be one of two things. I mean, it can be more than one of two things, but most commonly we see, in my case, no access to any kind of credit card, check, or cash without permission, had to ask for parking money, right? On the other side, it could be that he refuses to get a job and puts everything in your name and then charges the credit cards in your name up to the wazoo. So you're full of debt, right? So it can be either one of those things. They control it through being the one who works and controls all the money, or they control it through, you do all the work and you pay all the bills and they sit on the couch and drink. So financial abuse, then we move to spiritual abuse, and these aren't always a straight line. It's all over the place, right? Interactive and fluid. Spiritual abuse, using your spiritual beliefs, your community's spiritual beliefs, religious writings, the Bible or the Torah or, whatever your belief systems are, against you as a reason why you have to submit, or you have to listen to him, or he's the king of the castle, or God hates divorce, or, modesty, controlling what she wears. That can be a form of spiritual abuse, that they define what modesty is without, your full consent or agreement. And then we can move to spiritual. We did spiritual to sexual abuse and physical abuse. Those are usually at the end of the continuum. Those are the things that are illegal, right? Those are the things we can call the police on. Those are the things that are lethal, strangulations, shootings, all of those kinds of things over on that end of the continuum. But it's important to realize that verbal and emotional abuse is part of all of that. All of that. And so maybe that will help some of our listeners really just kind of understand the dynamics of domestic violence a little bit, be able to identify it a little bit. Lots of good resources out there. Our website has good information. The hotline.org has good information. You pretty much can Google domestic violence power and control wheel and come up with all sorts of great information and support. And so, I would leave it at that. I believe you. I believe your story. When someone discloses to you, being told that you believe them is super important, and that there is help. There's a whole community of us who are ready to go to bat and support and help you.
I trust you. Absolutely. I do have one more question, and this is more in regards to bystanders. Because I'm sure there's, the two people in the movie theater that have not experienced domestic violence or abuse, but what are the signs of it? And if someone's worried that their best friend is being abused, or, what is clear and noticeable within sharing that environment? Because it's very hard. I know you don't just walk in and see somebody being abused. You're like, oh, okay, that's abuse. But what would somebody kind of be looking for if they were concerned that someone they loved was in a domestic violent relationship?
So the biggest thing to look for are signs of control. So some of the things you might hear, and this is not a all-encompassing list, but I have to ask him first as a response to just about everything. Nope, I can't turn off my phone. He has to be able to reach me, right? Constantly checking in. Regardless of what's happening, you could be in the middle of a massage. Absolutely have to answer my phone. If I don't answer these words, I'll be in trouble. Someone ever says I'll be in trouble with their partner, that's like, oh, big red flags. You shouldn't get in trouble. You're an adult. You can have conversations, you can have disagreements, but I'm going to get in trouble. Any words that are kind of along those lines, things that point toward the fact that she's living under control. Oh, can't wear that. And I'm talking more than just like a one-time. We try to respect our significant others, right? Like, my boyfriend despises the color blue on me, so I try not to wear the color blue very much. Okay, well, if that is a mutual agreement and you're super comfortable with it, and that's a choice that you're making, that's consensual, go for it. More power to you. But if you're seeing a lot of these patterns of always deferring to him, always concerned about being in trouble, always worried about where you're at, when you're at, who you're with, what you're wearing, what you're eating, how much you're spending, just constantly, And then as a bystander, if it's also kind of making you nervous, listen to your own gut, right? Like that just doesn't feel right. And then, the most effective thing that you can say, I think, are those iMessages. I'm worried that, maybe he's a little bit controlling. What do you think? Or I see some concern here. If you need to talk about it, I'm here. I'll listen. I'll believe you. Right. I see some concerning behaviors. What do you think? Can we talk about this? And then respect the victim survivor's response, because they may not be ready to hear it. They may not be ready to hear it. They may not be ready to discuss it. They may not be ready to call the hotline. They may not be ready to safety plan. They may not be ready for any of it, but you're a safe person. And same with leaving, a victim survivor lives their life being told what to do. They're living under control and power. They live their life being told what to do by their abuser. Do not tell them that they have to leave their abusive situation. I worked with a victim at one point who chose to stay until her son was 18 because she knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if she left and he had unsupervised visitation, that he would murder her son. That is a valid reason to stay, right? Like we can't dictate for others what is going on in their life. A victim survivor knows their life the best, and they're an adult. They get to pick, they get to choose. And so those iMessages that I'm there for you if you need to talk about it. I'll help you recognize it. I'll help you respond to it. I'll help you find referrals, to help you with the things that I can't help you with. But most of all, I believe you. Those are the responses we're looking for.
Right. Now, I think I definitely ask because it doesn't sound like you got to go looking for these signs. Like they don't just point to it. They like siren scream, at least in my mind. Okay, that's like a you're getting in trouble. You have to keep your phone. Like those are very obvious, but to me. So thank you for sharing that for sure. And thank you for being you and taking your experience and turning it into yours, with capital yours. I feel like that's the only way, not the only way, but the majority of human survival and thriving is taking something that could have broken you and understanding what's to come of it. That's yours to keep and possess and then return to the world. Because if you don't, you can move on and get out of these particular situations. But I know from parental observation and experience that if you want to cling to that, even if you're out of the situation, you will neglect other parts of your life. And then that hope, perspective shift forward, what good does it do you, in a sense? But thank you so much. I feel like I've learned something. I definitely have. And seeing somebody with the passion to gives a shit, as my mom likes to say when she talks about what I do, it means a lot. Keeps me going,
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on to talk about what I am super passionate about. And if anybody does need to reach out to me for help, I'm happy to do what I can or find someone who can. Yeah, we know that some of our listeners are living in it now, and we believe you.
Yeah, we do. Thank you so much.
Head over and check out our YouTube channel. You'll find this episode and previous conversations of the Roundtable podcast. Everything Knows can be found on our website, nationalhumanservices.org.